It was a hot, sticky afternoon in a small town along a desolate stretch of highway in rural Kentucky. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a harsh golden light over the cracked pavement of a forgotten gas station. The only sounds were the hum of cicadas and the occasional rustle of wind moving through the dry, tall grass. To anyone who passed by, it would seem like just another sleepy, nothing special stop. But for Ella Parker, it was about to become the place where her life would change forever. Ella wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Just a woman in her late 40s dressed casually in a loose black sweater, faded jeans, and a pair of sunglasses. She had been driving for hours, making her way back from a small town meeting after wrapping up a series of case briefings. No one would look twice at her, and that's exactly what she wanted. A quick stop for gas, a cold drink, and some peace before hitting the road again. But little did she know, she was about to run into trouble. Trouble that would expose the ugly underbelly of the system that so many had chosen to ignore. Ella slid out of her SUV and stretched her back. The highway had been empty for miles, and she had been lost in her own thoughts, replaying the workday in her mind. She unscrewed the gas cap, reached for the nozzle, and was about to begin filling up when the sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the quiet. A sheriff's cruiser rolled into the lot slowly, the engine sputtering like an old man's cough. Ella didn't even flinch. She'd seen this kind of thing before, cops passing through small towns, overcompensating for whatever inferiority complex they carried, trying to prove something. The deputy behind the wheel had that look. His uniform was wrinkled, his boots scuffed and worn down. His name tag read Deputy Trent Matthews. He wasn't a big guy, but there was an air of arrogance in his step as he got out of the car. Ella could tell from the way he was eyeing her, sizing her up, that something was coming. She wasn't sure what exactly, but she had a gut feeling it wasn't going to be good. He didn't say hello, didn't ask if she needed help. He just walked toward her with a swagger, his boots crunching the gravel as if he owned the place. Ella had dealt with this kind of thing before, people who didn't know who she was and treated her like she was just another person to push around. She met his gaze, her posture calm but confident. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked, his voice rough, his words dragged out like he was annoyed just by looking at her. Ella didn't respond right away. Instead, she took her time to finish pumping the gas, not giving him the satisfaction of an immediate reply. After a beat, she turned toward him, her voice even and measured. "No, I'm just getting gas. I'm on my way home." He didn't seem convinced. His eyes narrowed as he glanced over the black SUV. It was a newer model, shiny and sleek, but it wasn't a car most people in this part of town would drive. He stepped a little closer, his hand hovering near his gun holster as if expecting trouble. "Let me see your ID," he demanded, his tone growing more commanding. Ella, always the professional, kept her cool. She was used to being doubted, scrutinized, especially in places where people didn't expect someone like her. She knew what was about to happen. People like Matthews, the ones with too much power and not enough sense, often took pleasure in flexing that power over others. She pulled out her driver's license slowly and handed it to him, keeping her expression neutral. "Here you go." Matthews took the license from her hand without a word. He read her name aloud, his eyes flicking over it like it was something foreign. "Ella Parker, huh?" He looked up at her, squinting as if trying to figure out who she was. "What's a woman like you doing all the way out here in Benton County?" Ella's pulse quickened slightly, but her face remained impassive. "Like I said, just getting gas." "Is there a problem, Deputy?" The deputy's lip curled into a sneer. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he took another step closer, towering over her. She could smell the stale coffee on his breath, feel the heat of his body as he invaded her personal space. His hand hovered near her, but Ella didn't flinch. She didn't let him see how much she wanted to step back. "I don't like your attitude, Miss Parker," he muttered, his voice low but menacing. And just like that, without warning, he shoved her, hard. His shoulder hit her chest, knocking her back into the side of her SUV. Ella stumbled, but caught herself on the door, steadying herself before she could fall. Her breath caught in her throat, but she refused to show any signs of weakness. "That's unnecessary, Deputy," she said sharply, her voice now a bit more forceful. But Matthews wasn't listening. He ignored her, shoving open the passenger door of her SUV and rifling through her glove compartment. She had done nothing wrong. She had no reason to be treated like this, but this was the reality she faced. "You got anything to hide in here?" he asked, throwing aside receipts, sunglasses, and the half-eaten granola bars she'd left on the seat. Ella's blood began to boil, but she knew she had to keep her cool. This wasn't the time to get emotional. It wasn't about her. It was about something bigger. She stood there, frozen for a moment, allowing herself to breathe before she spoke again. "The registration's in there," she said, trying to defuse the situation. "The top folder." Matthews didn't care. He didn't listen. His hand grabbed the folder, crumpled it in one fist, and turned to face her, his eyes filled with disdain. "I don't like the way you're speaking to me," he sneered. Before Ella could react, he kicked her, hard, in the shin. The crack of his boot hitting her leg echoed in the stillness of the parking lot. Ella gasped, the pain shooting through her leg, but she didn't fall. Instead, she stood there, trembling slightly, but defiant. The deputy smirked, as though he had won. "That's where you belong," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He turned to leave, walking back toward his cruiser like it was just another day. But as he climbed into his car and drove off, Ella didn't stay down. She slowly, deliberately pushed herself upright. Her knee was already throbbing, and the pain was intense. She could feel the blood seeping through the rip in her jeans, but there was something else now, something stronger than the physical ache. Ella knew she had just been pushed too far. She wasn't just a woman in a gas station anymore. She was someone with a purpose. She wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't just an assault on her. It was a moment for change, a chance to expose the system that allowed men like Matthews to get away with abuse. As she picked up her ID from the gravel and glanced at her phone, everything changed. A call came through. It was from the director of operations at the FBI. The fight had just begun. Ella stood there for a few moments, her breath shallow, her hand gripping the side of her SUV as she tried to steady herself. The pain from the kick was sharp and searing, but it was the humiliation that cut deeper. The feeling of being reduced to nothing, just another target for someone with power. Her knee throbbed, the ache spreading up her leg as blood soaked through her jeans. But she didn't show it, not now, not when she had a job to do. She bent down slowly, her fingers trembling only slightly as she picked up her ID from the gravel. She wiped it off with the edge of her sleeve, almost mechanically, as if the physical action could calm the storm raging in her chest. The heat from the pavement was stifling, and the air smelled of gasoline and dust, but none of it mattered. Ella knew she wasn't alone in this. The truth was already beginning to spread. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. A quick glance at the screen showed the caller ID. It was Olson, her contact in FBI operations. The words on the screen sent a small rush of determination through her. There was no going back now. She pressed answer and raised the phone to her ear, her voice colder than it had ever been. "This is Brooks," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. "Cam, are you all right?" the voice on the other end asked, filled with concern. The question lingered for just a second longer than it should have, but Ella wasn't the type to let her emotions show, not now, not with so much at stake. "Deputy Matthews assaulted me, kicked me. It's all on a civilian's phone. I need Riker's full file, every complaint, every disciplinary record, everything," she said without hesitation. There was no room for weakness in her voice now, no time to nurse her injuries. She was beyond that. She needed to move, needed to strike back. There was a pause on the other end before the response came. "On it. You good?" Ella glanced at the parking lot, where the dust from Matthew's departure still swirled in the air. Her body was aching, but her mind was sharp. She wasn't new to this. She knew how this game was played, and now she was going to make sure she controlled every move. "I'll be fine," she answered, and the words felt true, even if they were a bit of a lie. She hung up, her hand tight around the phone as she slipped it back into her pocket. The quiet was overwhelming, but it wouldn't last. She knew the storm was coming, and she was ready for it. Turning toward the teenager who had been watching, she noticed him now standing by the edge of the lot, his phone still in his hand. His face was a mixture of shock and disbelief. Ella knew what he had just witnessed. It was a moment of violence and ugliness, but it was also evidence, and that was everything right now. She wasn't going to let it slide. She walked over to him slowly, her body stiff from the pain, but her resolve unbroken. The boy held the phone in front of him, still unsure of what to do, his fingers trembling slightly as he lowered it. Ella could see the wheels turning in his head, the recognition of what had just occurred dawning on him. "Send that footage to the news," Ella said softly, her voice low but firm. "Get it out there." He blinked at her, still processing the weight of the situation, but Ella didn't wait for him to hesitate. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger than that. She had just become the face of something much larger, something that could finally bring attention to a broken system. The boy nodded, his hand steady now as he began to upload the video, his fingers flying over the screen. Ella didn't look back. She limped back to her SUV, one hand gripping the door, the other rubbing the ache in her leg. The pain was there, sharp and throbbing, but it only fueled the fire inside her. They had underestimated her. They had thought she was just another person they could push around. But they were wrong. The video was already making its way through social media, and she knew it was just a matter of time before it went viral. By the time she started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, the world would know what had happened here. She wasn't going to let this slide, not now, not ever. As she drove, her mind raced with the next steps. Her leg was stiffening, but she ignored it. She had something bigger to focus on. She needed to take control of the narrative before anyone else could spin it. She dialed Marcus Ellington's number. Marcus was the Deputy Director of Intelligence Coordination and someone she trusted implicitly. He picked up on the first ring. "Cam," his voice was tight, and she could hear the concern in it. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, her tone flat, businesslike. "I need everything on Deputy Kyle Matthews, all complaints, all files. I want his entire history. There's something bigger here, and I need to make sure I have all the pieces." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Copy that. What's going down, Cam?" "Something's wrong with this entire department. Matthews wasn't just acting on his own. I'm going to dig, and I'm going to make sure everything comes to light. I want Riker's full file, his disciplinary history, everything, and I want it now." The call ended, and Ella's hands tightened around the wheel as she focused on the road ahead. She knew what she was doing. She was playing the long game now, and it was a game she had mastered. It wasn't just about one cop anymore. It was about exposing the rot from the inside out. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an encrypted message from Marcus. It was quick: files, history, complaints. The name Matthews had surfaced more than once. Ella skimmed through the files, scanning for anything that would tie Matthews to a larger issue. She found it. Over the years, complaints against Matthews had been swept under the rug. The same pattern, time and time again. Nothing had ever been done. This wasn't just about an abusive officer. It was about a system that had allowed this kind of thing to fester and grow. Ella's grip tightened on the phone, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't just about one man. It was about everything he represented, the system that had protected him, and the power structure that had shielded him from accountability. She knew it was time to strike. The storm was already gathering. All she had to do now was make sure it hit harder than they ever expected. And with that, she drove on. The pain in her leg was real, but the fire burning inside her was stronger. By the time she reached the next town, everything would be in motion. She wasn't just a victim. She was a force of nature, and she was going to make sure the world knew it. Ella didn't waste any time. She knew this was only the beginning. But she also knew she couldn't let the moment slip by. She had to move quickly, decisively. The video of the incident was already spreading like wildfire, but now the real work began. She needed to control the narrative, gather the facts, and build her case before anyone had the chance to twist the story. She could feel the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders, but she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after what had just happened. The phone buzzed again and she glanced down at the screen. It was Marcus. Ella had worked with Marcus for years, through thick and thin. He was always calm under pressure, a steady hand when everything around them was chaos. She tapped the screen to answer the call, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as she drove down the empty stretch of highway. "Cam, you there?" Marcus's voice was low, but she could hear the tension in it. "Yeah, I'm here," she said, her grip tightening on the wheel as she pushed the pedal down. "I need you to track everything, Riker's history, his complaints, anything connected to him. Start with the department's records. I want everything, every incident, every action swept under the rug. I'm not letting this go." "On it," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I'll get back to you with the full file." She could hear the buzz of the phone in her hand as it vibrated against her leg. The video was out there and it was spreading fast. The world was beginning to catch up with her story, but she wasn't concerned with the immediate backlash. No, she knew there would be plenty of people who tried to spin the story, who would ignore the larger picture and focus only on the incident itself. She had to make sure they understood it was more than just an isolated act of violence. This was a broken system, a culture that allowed people like Deputy Riker to thrive and escape consequences. The road stretched out before her, quiet, isolated. A few miles down, a diner with peeling red paint appeared on the horizon. She made a quick decision to pull in. She wasn't tired, but she needed a moment to think, a moment to gather herself before the storm hit. She parked her SUV in the lot and stepped out, her knees still throbbing but manageable for now. The last thing she wanted was to show weakness. Inside the diner, the air smelled faintly of coffee and grease. It was a small, quiet place, with worn-out booths and a counter that looked like it hadn't been refurbished in years. Ella sat at the far booth, her back against the wall so she could watch the door. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the few people scattered around. No one paid her any special attention, and that was fine. She didn't need anyone to look at her, not yet anyway. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a friendly smile, brought her a mug of black coffee and a slice of pie without asking. Ella nodded in thanks, but she wasn't interested in small talk. Not now. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, scanning the message from Marcus. "I've got everything. Riker's got a history. Multiple excessive force complaints, most of them buried. Sheriff's office has been covering for him for years. And it gets worse." Ella's eyes narrowed as she read through the file. Everything she had expected, and more. The pattern was clear. Deputy Riker had been a problem for years, but the sheriff's office had swept it under the rug every time. No discipline, no action. The system was rotten, and Riker had been allowed to continue his abuse with impunity. "Marcus, I need everything on Sheriff Linda Calkins, too," she muttered to herself. "Get everything you can. I want to see the whole structure, top to bottom." Marcus responded quickly, "On it." Ella took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had everything she needed to make a move. This wasn't just about Deputy Riker anymore. It was about the entire system that had protected him. The sheriff, the supervisors, the entire department. They had allowed him to continue his reign of terror, and now they were going to answer for it. She closed her phone and leaned back in her booth, allowing herself a moment of quiet. The steady hum of the diner and the clinking of silverware around her did little to soothe her nerves, but she could feel her focus sharpening. She wasn't just a woman nursing her injuries anymore. She was a force, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. By the time she finished her coffee and pie, the video had already exploded across social media. The first few posts were simple, a shaky video of the incident with a caption that barely did it justice. But now, it was everywhere. News outlets, social media platforms, it was spreading faster than she could keep up with. She paid for her meal and stood up, the stiffening in her leg reminding her that she needed to take care of herself. But there was no time for rest. The real work had just begun. As she climbed into her SUV and started the engine, her phone buzzed again. A news outlet had picked up the video and was already running it on a loop. It wasn't just a local story anymore. It was national news. Her story had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. But Ella knew she wasn't done yet. The public outrage was only the first step. She needed to make sure this didn't die down. She needed to keep the pressure on. She glanced at her phone again, reading the text from Marcus. "We've got Calkins records. She's been protecting Riker for years. Ties to the sheriff's office, multiple complaints, and some serious financial backing from local contractors. It's all here." This was it. The moment when everything changed. Ella didn't hesitate. She opened her laptop, pulling up the files Marcus had sent her. The connections were clear. Calkins had been running a tight ship, protecting her deputies at all costs. It wasn't just Riker. It was the entire system. The web of corruption was deeper than she had anticipated. She knew what she had to do. She needed to go public. And not just with her story. She needed to expose everything, every single connection, every cover-up, every piece of evidence that linked this rotten system together. The next few hours were a blur of action. Ella worked through the night, pulling together the files, double-checking the evidence, and coordinating with the right people. By the time dawn broke, she had everything in place. The video was out there, the public was watching, and now it was time for the truth to come crashing down. Ella didn't look back as she pulled onto the highway again. The pain in her leg was there, but it didn't matter. She was driving towards something much bigger than herself, and when the time came, the storm would hit, and nothing would be the same again. She knew it was only a matter of time before the real reckoning began. Ella's plan was simple, but its execution had to be flawless. The pieces were falling into place, and she knew the storm that had started with a simple kick would soon become a hurricane that would sweep away the entire corrupt structure of Benton County. But this wasn't just about Riker anymore. It wasn't even just about the sheriff. It was the whole system. The unspoken alliances, the cover-ups, the people in power who thought they could do whatever they wanted without facing consequences. It was time for the reckoning. And Ella was going to make sure it came crashing down. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. "Cam, the video's gone viral. News outlets, social media, it's everywhere. People are furious. We've got eyes on Calkins now. Her office has been flooded with calls from every direction." Ella's grip tightened around the steering wheel as she drove down the highway. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she had expected it. The video of Deputy Riker's attack on her had sparked outrage, and now everyone was taking a closer look at the system that had allowed him to get away with this kind of abuse. But it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed to build a case so strong that no one could ignore it. "I've got everything we need," Ella said, her voice steady but laced with determination. "We can't stop now. We keep pushing. We expose everything." Marcus was silent for a moment, then responded with a tone of agreement. "I've got you covered. We're moving on Calkins next. I found something interesting. Her ties to local contractors are more than just financial support. There's more going on behind the scenes than we realized." Ella's eyes narrowed. She knew this was bigger than anyone had imagined. The sheriff wasn't just running a corrupt department. She was a key player in a much larger game, a game that involved money, power, and people who were willing to do anything to protect their interests. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled her resolve. "Keep digging, Marcus. We're going to expose everything. I'll take care of the rest." She ended the call and parked at the edge of a quiet stretch of highway. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the empty road. It was time to make her next move. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. Ella knew the system wasn't going to give up easily. They'd already tried to silence her once. Her suspension from the FBI was a clear warning, an attempt to remove her from the equation. But Ella wasn't someone who backed down. If anything, the attack on her only made her more determined. She took a deep breath and stepped out of her car. Her knee was sore, the pain a constant reminder of what she'd endured, but she didn't care. The fight wasn't about her injuries, it was about justice. It was about exposing the corruption that had festered in Benton County for years, and it was about making sure that Riker, Calkins, and everyone else involved paid for their actions. The diner she had stopped at earlier that day was quiet now, the neon lights flickering as the night settled in. Inside, a few late-night truckers sipped coffee, their heads down as they focused on their meals. Ella took a seat at the far end of the diner, her back against the wall so she could see the entrance. She pulled out her phone and opened the files Marcus had sent her. It was worse than she had imagined. The connections between Calkins, local contractors, and other law enforcement officials were undeniable. She had always suspected that Benton County's sheriff's office was a hub for corruption, but seeing the evidence laid out before her was something else. Each name on the list was another piece of the puzzle, another person who had turned a blind eye to the abuse and manipulation that had been happening under their noses. She tapped on the screen, pulling up a new document titled The Benton Network. This wasn't just about one deputy or one sheriff. This was about a network of people who had turned law enforcement into a racket, using their positions of power to manipulate the system and line their pockets. As she scrolled through the documents, she could feel her pulse quicken. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The evidence was all there, and now it was time to take it public. She wasn't just going to take down Riker or Calkins. She was going to take down the entire system that had allowed them to thrive. Ella typed quickly, compiling everything she had learned into a comprehensive report. She didn't want to leave any stone unturned. The public needed to see the full picture, to understand how deep the corruption went. She couldn't afford to pull any punches. This was the moment that would define everything. Her phone buzzed again, and she looked down at the screen. It was another message from Marcus. Cam, the video's made its way to the governor's office. They're talking about launching an investigation into Calkins. People are starting to realize just how much dirt is buried in that department. Ella smiled to herself. This was it. The pressure was building, and it wasn't going to stop. But she needed to keep pushing. She couldn't let them recover from this. She had to strike now before they had the chance to cover their tracks. She closed her laptop and stood up, her body aching with every movement. But the pain didn't matter. Not anymore. She walked toward the door of the diner, her mind racing with the next steps. She had one goal now, to take down the corrupt network that had been operating in Benton County for years. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of rain, and the sky was darkening as the storm clouds gathered. Ella climbed into her SUV, her hands gripping the wheel tightly as she pulled back onto the highway. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more obstacles, more people who tried to stop her. But she was ready. She had to be. As the miles stretched out before her, Ella's mind was focused. She was no longer just a federal agent. She was a woman on a mission, a woman who had seen the rot at the heart of the system and was determined to expose it for the world to see. She wasn't going to stop until the job was done. The truth was out there now, and nothing was going to stand in her way. The following morning, the sky above Benton County was heavy with tension, the clouds hanging low, thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. Ella sat in the driver's seat of her SUV, hands gripping the wheel tightly as she stared ahead, her thoughts sharp, calculating. Everything had been leading to this moment. The exposure of the corruption, the official federal probe, the public outcry. But now, she could feel the storm was about to make landfall. There would be no turning back. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus. It was Marcus. "Cam, it's happening. The story's blown up. Your name's everywhere. They're talking about it on every station. People are calling for action. Riker's suspended. Calkins is on the defensive. They're scrambling." A small, grim smile tugged at Ella's lips. She'd known this was coming, but seeing it all come together felt different. There was power in the truth, and now the world was listening. The video, the complaints, the corruption, it was all there for anyone willing to see. The people of Benton County had been silenced for far too long, but not anymore. She turned the key in the ignition and pulled out of the parking lot of the motel, her knees stiff from the long drive, the sharp pain still gnawing at her leg. But the pain was a constant now, a reminder of the fight she'd entered. She didn't mind it. In fact, she welcomed it. Every ache, every bruise, it was all part of the war she was fighting. As she navigated the winding country roads, Ella's mind was on the bigger picture. The battle against Riker and Calkins was just the start. It was about something much more significant, exposing the system, a broken machine that allowed men like Riker to thrive unchecked, a system that had been built on silence, fear, and complicity. Her investigation had already opened a can of worms, and she was determined to keep going, to dig deeper, to make sure this didn't get swept under the rug. "Where are we on Calkins?" Ella asked, her voice steady as she spoke into the Bluetooth speaker of her car. "I've got her entire file, Cam," Marcus replied. "She's been covering for Riker and a few others for years. But what's worse, there's money involved. She's tied up with contractors who've been awarded questionable bids, and there's a whole financial network feeding into her re-election campaign." Ella's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The corruption ran deep, deeper than she had initially thought. It wasn't just about the deputies. It was about power, money, and how far people would go to protect their interests. But Ella wasn't backing down now. She had a job to do, and it wasn't just about Riker or Calkins. It was about everyone involved, every person who had let this system continue without consequence. She felt the tension in the air as she neared the Benton County courthouse. It was buzzing with activity now, protesters, news crews, and activists all gathered outside, their voices loud and clear. They were done waiting. They were ready for justice. Ella parked a few blocks away, taking a moment to prepare herself. Her leg ached more with every movement, but she ignored it. She had a purpose, and nothing was going to slow her down. She was done hiding in the shadows. Today she would be the storm that brought the truth to light. She entered the courthouse with her head held high, her badge clipped securely to her belt. The room went quiet the moment she walked in. The reporters, the cameras, the officials, they all paused, looking at her as if they weren't sure what to expect. But Ella was calm, composed. She had done this 1,000 times before, but today it felt different. Today, she wasn't just a federal agent, she was the force that was going to take down the corruption that had poisoned this town. Her eyes scanned the room as she made her way to the front. She noticed the looks of disbelief from some of the officials, the unease in their eyes. They knew. They all knew. Today was the day their world would come crashing down. Ella reached the podium, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of the reporters, the activists, and the few remaining members of the sheriff's office who hadn't fled. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut through. "My name is Ella Brooks," she began, her voice steady, calm, but filled with the weight of everything she had been through. "I've served in law enforcement for over 20 years. I've worked alongside federal agents, state officials, and local law enforcement to dismantle criminal networks and bring justice to those who need it most. But today, I'm not here to talk about those cases." She paused, letting her words sink in. The reporters were silent, hanging on her every word. "I'm here today because I was assaulted. I was attacked by a man who thought he could get away with it because of the uniform he wore and the power he thought he had. Deputy Riker in broad daylight kicked me in the shin and left me lying on the ground like I didn't matter. And the worst part?" Ella's voice grew sharper. "The worst part is that it wasn't just Riker. It was the system that protected him. It was the sheriff's office that allowed him to continue his reign of terror without consequence." The room was still, the silence hanging heavy in the air. But Ella could feel the eyes on her, the weight of the truth settling in. "This isn't just about one man," she continued, her voice now cold with determination. "It's about the system that has allowed this kind of abuse to happen again and again. It's about the sheriff's office that has swept complaints under the rug, that has protected its own no matter the cost. It's about the people who have turned a blind eye to this corruption because it benefits them." She took a step forward, her eyes locking with the sheriff's department officials who were still present. You think this is over? It's just beginning. I've filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. I've submitted evidence of civil rights violations and misconduct within the Benton County Sheriff's Office. And I'm not stopping there. I'm launching a federal investigation into Sheriff Linda Calkins and her entire department. This is just the beginning of the reckoning. The reporters were murmuring now, their pens flying across their notepads as the magnitude of her words hit them. Ella could hear the whispers, the shock in the room, but she didn't flinch. She was right. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who had been abused by this system, every person who had been ignored, every person who had been silenced. "I'm not here to play politics," she said, her voice firm. "I'm here for justice, for the truth. And I will make sure that everyone involved in this corruption pays for what they've done. I will not back down." Ella turned and walked away from the podium, the crowd parting to make room for her. The noise was deafening now. Cheers, applause, the sound of justice finally being served. But Ella didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had done what she came to do. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back now. As she exited the courthouse, her phone buzzed again. It was Marcus. "The video's gone viral. The public's on fire. We've got federal investigations starting. It's happening, Cam. They're going to answer for this." She let out a small breath. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted. The storm was no longer just in her mind. It was real, and it was happening. But Ella wasn't done. She wasn't going to stop until every single person involved in this corruption was brought to justice. The storm had only just begun, and she was ready to face whatever came next. As the dust began to settle in Benton County, Ella's actions reverberated far beyond the courthouse steps. She had started a movement, a reckoning that demanded accountability not just from one deputy, not just from the sheriff, but from a whole system that had long protected the corrupt and the powerful. Her pursuit of justice didn't just expose one man's abuse of power. It unveiled a deep-seated culture of corruption and silence that spanned years, possibly decades. But the real power of Ella's story lies in the simple truth. One person can make a difference. She was just doing her job, but when the system failed her, she didn't back down. She fought back, not with violence or anger, but with the weapon of truth. She understood that real change doesn't always come from grand speeches or sweeping movements. It starts with standing up in the face of injustice, speaking the truth, and refusing to let anyone silence you. The lesson here is clear. When you see something wrong, speak out. Don't wait for someone else to take action. You don't have to be a superhero or hold a title to stand up for what's right. Just like Ella, you have the power to change the narrative, expose the truth, and hold people accountable no matter how powerful they are. In the end, Ella didn't just expose a corrupt deputy. She became a symbol, a reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing, that the system can always be reformed, and that power can be taken back from those who abuse it. She didn't fall, and neither will you. The road to justice may be long, but the first step always starts with courage. If you found Ella's story inspiring, if it moved you to reflect on the systems around you and the change you can help create, hit that like button. Drop a comment with the number 1 if you believe in fighting for justice. And if you think there's more to be done, if you want to see this story continue to inspire others, hit 0 to share your thoughts and let me know what more you'd like to see. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice is a journey, not a destination. Let's keep moving forward together.